Greetings, Calico fans. This is H.H. German from Sigma Comics. Hope you're all well out there in internet land. And before I begin, as always, I'm going to take a shot of the Calico mug. Not available for sale on sigmacomics.com. Today we're going to talk about a character that was very inspirational, that always has been very inspirational for those of us who are fans of muscular writing, a hair on the chest type of character. And I'm talking about Frank Castle, the Punisher. And before I continue, I want to remind you what we do. We're Sigma Comics. We are devoted to the fight against animal abuse through comics and manga. And in keeping with that, I want to just very quickly show you some of our comics. We have wonderful comics available on our website, sigmacomics.com. And listen, if you like the Punisher, I mean, just look at that cover. If you like the Punisher from back in the late '80s, early '90s, you're really gonna love this series. And we also have manga format as well. Let's get that glare out of there for you. So really wonderful manga. This is 200-page manga tankobons featuring the Calico, the ultimate defender of animals. And it's been said, getting back to the Punisher, that the Calico makes the Punisher look like Gandhi. And that's not us saying it. There's some articles out there. In fact, there's quite a few articles and videos out there attesting to the intensity of the Calico. So check that series out at sigmacomics.com, or if we have any active Kickstarters, go to kickstarter.com and check it out there. So let's get back to Frank Castle. A Marvel Comics character from back in the 70s. And back in the 70s in New York City, I don't know how many of you in the audience remember what that was like. I was a child in the 70s, and I did live in New York City. And let's just say that I do remember a difference in the grip. It was a tensile grip on me by my parents whenever we would walk through the streets of New York. I don't care where it was, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan. But mainly we made our way through the streets of the Bronx and Brooklyn, mainly because originally from the Bronx, and I had a lot of family in Brooklyn, which I do have to this day. So Frank Castle was the invention of Marvel Comics. A gentleman by the name of Jerry Conway, I believe. He gets the credit for creating the character. And back then the character used some weaponry to take care of business in the streets of New York. And the Calico always got his man. He was basically a killer going after the people in his sights. And eventually the character was taken to a different level, in my opinion, certainly by many, the opinion of many, by writers, creators like Mike Baron, just to name one of many. But I think for me, Mike Baron was really the seminal Punisher creator that gave the Punisher sort of that mantra that we associate with the Punisher, being this guy who just goes after the baddies at all costs. So I certainly give him the credit, and eventually people like Chuck Dixon and Garth Ennis were able to further craft the character. But for my money, Mike Baron is really the one that took that character and made him what we know now as the Punisher. The Punisher has always been a character that would just elicit terror from the criminals out there, because this is a guy who's going after people who do terrible things out there, and that's his whole thing. His family's been butchered, right in front of him. He survives, and he makes it a point, dedicates his whole life to going after the baddies, and in a major way. And I think the concept, the character himself, just a wonderful combination of addressing a problem through a wonderful character, such a well-written character, such a well-constructed character, well-written by people like Mike Baron. And Mike Baron was on that was on that Punisher title. I believe this was the miniseries back in the late '80s for a good 4 years. And then when you have that kind of compare that to today in comics. I don't even think there is such a thing. A writer getting a hold of a character, and for 4 or 5 years, and really dedicating the time, the effort, the energy to laying the groundwork there for the character. That's one of the many things that's missing in today's comics. But in getting back to the Punisher, Punisher was always driven by the aforementioned, the fact that his family was killed, and he had a very simple and easy to understand goal in mind, and that was to eradicate the bad guys at all costs, as I just mentioned. Well, fast forward to today, the Punisher. There's a series right now. The writer, I believe his name is Jason Aaron, and I have read quite a bit of the series, and like many of you in the audience, I'm just left scratching my head. How is this, the Punisher? The story's been taken in a very different direction. It doesn't make sense, and this is the thing about writing. Once you start complicating the storyline, okay, this is challenging. Creating challenges for the reader to absorb the essence of the story, of the character. This presents a problem, and that's what's been happening at the big two of late. And of course, I mean Marvel and DC, and especially with this character. I'm not going to go into the changes. All I could tell you is they're very significant from what you and I know as the Punisher, to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the year they have the Punisher wearing stilettos and a feather boa down the street. It's just a different character altogether, and frankly, it's embarrassing. It really is. Now, I don't know if they ended the series altogether, or they're not going to have the series, or eventually, they just sort of put it on the shelf, because this is definitely how you run a character into the ground. What they did here with the Punisher in this Punisher series. I'm sure you have your sentiments, and feel free to share them here in the comment section. People like myself, I started reading the Punisher in the late '80s when Mike Baron was writing it, and at that time I was a teen in high school, and I very much identified with someone who experienced loss, and just sort of removed myself from the everyday to focus on myself and improve and directly engage the targets, if you will. I certainly do that, and maybe some of you in the audience can appreciate the way Frank Castle, sort of removed himself from his everyday, day-to-day life there to change up everything about him to become the Punisher. So, we all have our changes that we go through, but the change that occurs in this story here, in this current Punisher story by Jason Aaron, is it's a dramatic departure from both the storyline and the character. That's the thing, as a writer, you always want to, and this isn't just a writer, as a creator in general, you always want to approach a subject, regardless of what it is, from a different vantage. And maybe in doing so, you're able to sort of identify different things about the character or about the storyline that you can, take the reader down a new path that maybe wasn't explored before, or perhaps it was explored, but not in a certain way. Now you're going to sort of go down a different route towards the same end. So this is the great thing about doing that, about sort of taking the subject and turning it a little and looking at it from that way. The problem is this has been they basically went topsy-turvy on this thing. I mean, so that's sort of where unfortunately where the character is. It's a wonderful character. It's one of my favorite characters. It's definitely one of my favorite characters, and if not my favorite character as an adult. I know as a kid, my favorite character was Spider-Man, Spider-Man really and the Punisher, those are really my two go-tos. And of course, the Punisher was a creation that came from an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, a legendary comic book series. In fact, my favorite of all time. So there you have it. That's where we stand right now with the Punisher. It's unfortunate. I think it's part of a trend that's been happening culturally. You see it in movies. You see it in comics, in all sorts of different creative endeavors. But this is the sort of the last change or modification, if you will, to a character in a very major and significant way. And I would say in a very detrimental way, because when you take the time and energy to construct a character with the texture, grit, and grime of a Frank Castle Punisher, and you introduce, again, pretty significant changes to the storyline that simply, on even a basic level, just don't make sense. Now what you're doing is you're complicating the reception for the reader to digest this content in a palatable way that makes sense. An example I've used in the past is when you're used to going to a restaurant and all of a sudden they're changing up the menu. And the thing is, it's one thing if the modification was consistent with, the type of flavors that you get with the restaurant, but unfortunately, more and more what's happening, and again, especially in comics we see this, it is a dramatic departure from the menu. And as part of this, you're getting a pretty notable portion of the audience that simply they're just closing the book and going the other way. And I'm sorry to see this for such a wonderful brand and franchise that is the Punisher, Marvel Comics. Wonderful, wonderful concept, great story, and one that really was addressing a need at the time, which was the crime in New York City in the 70s. I mean, you can't get a better character to address the crime in New York City in the 70s than someone like the Punisher. I mean, people were getting shot, stabbed on the regular, all across the city. And when you have villains that are terrified of what's coming their way, when they see that skull walking down the streets of Brooklyn, Manhattan, Bronx, wherever it is, I mean, that makes for some pretty damn entertaining reading, okay? So, again, fan of the Charles Bronson Death Wish series of the 80s, the 70s and 80s. Any type of intense, hardcore character, like a Dirty Harry, like a Paul Kersey character from the Death Wish series. This is what you had in the Punisher. Well, it doesn't seem like that's the case with this series. This guy doesn't even have guns anymore. I think he's got, like, I don't know if it's bats or knives or something. But anyway, that's my take right now. It is unfortunate. And hopefully, the company that is Marvel sits down and really looks at themselves on this decision, because I think it was a horrendous one. You have to get the right writer on this. You have to get the right team. It's not just the writers, the right team to really look at each other and say, hey, is this really what we want to do with this character? This is a wonderful, very unique character. And I can tell you, I'll go even further. The Punisher was very influential for our series, the Calico. Hector Gill gets intel on people who would be used to kill animals, and he goes after them with extreme justice. Punisher-esque. So that's it in a nutshell. Take a look at our website, sigmacomics.com. If you want a real hardcore character like the Punisher used to be, that's Hector Gill, trust me. You're definitely going to be very pleased and fully satisfied with the way Hector Gill, the Calico, leaves the bad guys. Those assholes that abuse and kill animals. That's it. H.H. Sherman, Sigma Comics. Once again, don't forget, we have the wonderful manga series. You can get them either on Kickstarter or our website, Sigma Comics. A combined 400 pages of awesome Calico action. And for those comic book fans, I mean, look at these comics. Just look at that artwork. That's top-notch stuff from Garner BL. I mean, look at these covers. Look at the jiggler. When that body starts jiggling, bodies hit the deck, baby. You see, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of character that I'm talking about. We just don't see this. And, you know, if it's not for, you know, thankfully we have creators like Chuck Dixon and Mike Barron that are still putting out comics. And, of course, you know, that I'm trying to follow that same path. Creating characters that really have some serious grit and texture on them so that you are not left unsatisfied. H.H. Sherman, Sigma Comics. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Keep on fighting for animals.